as I speak to you on this live transmission, and you can pick up the podcast if you miss any of it over at the INFOWARRIOR.com following the show, are two really important documents from the FBI, from Team 8 of the initial investigation into 9/11. Now, in my left hand is the itinerary of one General Mahmoud Ahmed. And why is that important? Well, General Mahmoud Ahmed was essential in actually funding the hijackers through U.S. intelligence. He used Omar Saeed Sheikh, the supposed murderer of Daniel Pearl, who later came out that he was on a CIA payroll. And he was also on the ISI payroll. Now, this is the guy that murdered Daniel Pearl, a Jewish journalist who went over to Pakistan to find out how the hijackers were funded. Okay, murdered. Now, this is the guy that's wiring money to Muhammad Atta and others just before the attacks. $100,000 according to the FBI. Now, that would be 1/5 of the amount of money that it took to coordinate and execute these attacks if you believe the 9/11 Commission report. That's if you believe that fable out there. Okay? 1/5. Yet Pakistan is our ally. However, people like Joseph Biden got on the House floor in the days after 9/11 and threatened Pakistan. Pakistan backed down. They backed right down, and they let us use their nation as a launching base for the operations in Afghanistan and Iraq, which continue today, and we'll get into that later. Obama pledging 34,000 more troops in Afghanistan. The peace president, the guy who just got the Nobel Peace Prize, 34,000 more troops in Iraq. Now, in my right hand is something that may be just a bit more interesting. These are a bunch of exercises that took place in the years, months, and even days, the day before 9/11, involving hijackings. Now, they won't get into the actual drills that took place on 9/11 because that would be just too scandalous. But I do want to point out that, yes, there were hijacking drills on 9/10 and 9/9 involving terrorists with explosives who planned to detonate them over New York City. And then the second one was Cubans demanding political asylum to be taken to New York City. So both of these attacks in the prior days to 9/11, 9/9 and 9/10, took place in New York City. And again, they don't list the stuff on 9/11. Now, the clips we're going to play you, basically John Farmer coming out and saying, yes, the whole thing is a sham. I do empathize somewhat with 9/11 truth because our government story just isn't true. It just isn't true. But then he says, there's no explosives in the buildings and there's no proof of that. How would you know, John Farmer? You didn't look at any of that evidence. You admittedly didn't look at any of that evidence. And then Popular Mechanics comes on to give out their basic talking points. And Bob McEwen says, hey, wait a minute. Don't they train to go after hijackings? And he's like, we supposedly live in this world where too many people have watched too many movies and they think that we have this hyper-competent government. But we never had drills or were prepared for hijackings that took place inside the United States. Oh, really? Because right here on a 122.99 and 123.99, you did have inside hijackings. And then again, with Amalgam Virgo, 6 months before the attacks, you had an inside hijacking, which was a suicide mission into the Capitol building. And the actual government document shows Osama bin Laden on the cover, all covered in Fabled Enemies. We're going to show you some of that coming up. This is why you need a PrisonPlanet.tv subscription, so you don't just hear the evidence. You can watch along and say, hey, he does have that document in his hand. They did have hijackings going on inside the United States. Inside hijackings. Not outside, inside. So on the other side, we're going to play some of this CBC piece. We're going to get into Fabled Enemies, and we're going to take your calls. In the third hour, I really want to talk about some of the pop culture that's going on and the show V, because it's been very interesting to me. I got a lot of emails about it. I finally started watching the show, and folks, it is over the top. It's the InfoWarrior with Jason Bermas, PrisonPlanet.tv, Infowars.com. Over 8 years later, some of the establishment media outside of the United States has finally decided to do a fair piece on 9/11 truth. We have seen fair pieces before in South Korea. The CBC actually, before this, did a special, which I was in, with some of the loose change guys, which was somewhat fair. It wasn't too biased. After 9/11 in 2002, they actually did a small show on some of the limited hangout, let it happen on purpose stuff. But this by far surpasses any of that. The debunkers are very upset with this special. Very, very upset. They do not like the fact that establishment media is acting like, hey, wait a minute, these questions are valid. We should be asking these questions. So let's start it up with the first clip. This is John Farmer. And John Farmer was the guy who was responsible for outlining this timeline for the commissioners. And he just comes out and says, look, this isn't the truth, and that's why I can empathize with these people. But then they start getting crazy with it. But he admits what we were told about 9/11, hook, line, and sinker, and there were so many different official versions from the media and government, none of which were true, is a falsity. Let's hit the clip.
At the hearings of the 9/11 Commission, Senior Counsel John Farmer established the timeline that day. He says by misleading the public to hide incompetence on September 11th, the U.S. government unwittingly triggered the truth movement.
I tell you where I have a degree of empathy, and that is, I think when you have a situation as we had here, where the official government version of what happened doesn't square with reality and leaves people scratching their heads, then people's minds run crazy, and to varying degrees. And I think that's what you have with these some of these more grand theories that somehow they snuck into the Trade Center and planted explosives on different floors. There's absolutely nothing to support that.
So there he goes, admitting that the entire 9/11 Commission is a fraud, is a lie, that he can empathize, but then he goes, there's no evidence to support explosives going off in the World Trade Center. Now, on this show alone, I've played dozens of clips of people talking about explosives in the World Trade Center. And we've showed you the clips with the molten metal. We've showed you the World Trade Center quote-unquote asteroids, which are molten iron, steel, and cement combined in this mixture. All impossible without steel not weakening, but turning into its molten form, which is completely impossible from jet fuel, which burns at about 18 to 1900 degrees maximum. And to get that, you need 2800 degrees plus. We also have the video of the molten metal pouring out of the World Trade Center. And the skeptics and debunkers say, oh no, that's aluminum from the plane. Yet they cannot duplicate that because aluminum is silver. It's silver when it goes down. It's not red. It's not molten iron and steel like we saw before. So let's get right into the next clip. Now, this clip, I believe, is the David Ray Griffin clip where they have to admit that Barbara Olson, in which all of this box cutter talk and hijackers with bandanas came from, never actually made her calls to the solicitor, Ted Olson, who said that he talked to her twice from her cell phone. Twice. Yet the FBI's own evidence shows that she tried to call once and she never got through. So let's go to that clip right now.
That just means that they've done a better job.
But here, too, there are unanswered questions. For instance, what's perhaps the most famous call that day? From television commentator Barbara Olson on board American Flight 77, headed to the Pentagon, to her husband Ted Olson, then Solicitor General of the U.S.
He told CNN that she had called him that morning from Flight 77, called him twice, talked to him for about a minute each time. He was uncertain whether it was cell phone or seatback phone. He went back and forth. But he said she reported that there were hijackers on the planes, and they were armed with knives and box cutters. The only reported call that mentioned box cutters. So that shows you how important these calls from Barbara Olson were, because everybody knows the hijackers had box cutters.
But that's another of those unresolved issues. Ted Olson told the FBI his wife phoned twice that morning, calls lasting about a minute apiece. But in a 9/11 court case, FBI evidence was that Barbara Olson attempted just one phone call from Flight 77, which lasted 0 seconds.
You've only got two choices. Either Ted Olson was duped by fake calls, or he just made it up. He lied. Either way, the official story is based on a lie. And thus far, we have been unable to get a single newspaper or magazine or TV station in the United States to report this, which the FBI reported in 2006.
All right, let's cut that clip. I mean, that should spell it out for you, folks. The one call that talked about box cutters, the one call never even happened. And Barbara Olson is a CNN commentator, a news person. We know that CNN in 2000 got caught embedding the CIA at CNN's base in Atlanta, Georgia. Look it up. They said they were interns after they were caught. Give me a break. Public loves to be lied to. They just can't get enough of it. They get caught and then they say something like, oh no, those were CIA interns. So is it just me, or is Barbara Olson maybe just a little bit too beautiful to be Ted Olson's real wife? Possibly a marriage of convenience, an intelligence marriage. I mean, you look at the scandal with Joe Wilson and Valerie Plame. There's a CIA couple. You know, they may really be intimately involved, but at the same time, they're still both working for the agency at that time.